Hi, this is a short introduction video to Fusio, an open-source API management platform. Let's dive directly into the backend and build a simple API from scratch so that you get a feeling how Fusio works. The backend provides an API dashboard which shows all important metrics of your API. To build an endpoint with Fusio, we need to configure, at first, a connection. A connection provides basically access to external services like a database or a remote HTTP API. Let's start and create a database connection. We can now use the database designer to create a new table on this connection. In this demo, we create a simple news table with some columns. Now we also add some test data to the table. Next, we create a second connection to a remote HTTP API. In this case, we use the public Star Wars API. Fusio contains also a small HTTP client which you can use to test the API endpoint. Now we can create an action. An action is basically a small function which contains the business logic of your endpoint. At first, we create an action to return all news from the table which we have just created. Therefore, we use the PHP worker action which allows us to write the logic in simple PHP. Fusio has also support for other languages like JavaScript or Python. In the code, we get the database connection and select all columns from the table and return the result. As second action, we use the Star Wars connection to fetch data from the remote API. The connection returns an HTTP client which we then use to get the data. Now we test and execute the action which we have created. We can use the response of the action to create a new schema which we use to describe the response payload for our API. Through this, Fusio can automatically generate an open API documentation and also client SDKs. We also test the film action and create a fitting schema for the payload. At last, we can now create an operation. An operation is assigned to a specific HTTP path and method and invokes an action. It contains also all meta information to describe the request and response payload. Therefore, we use the schemas which we have created. We are now ready and have just created a small production-ready API with 2 endpoints. Since both endpoints are public, we can directly test the endpoint in the browser. If you want to make this API available to external developers, you can use the developer portal, which Fusio provides out of the box. The developer portal is a small app which contains documentation about your API and explains to external developers how they can use your API. All content of the app can be also customized at the backend. It includes also a rendered version of the OpenAPI specification. As you can see, it shows the schema, which we have previously created. Then it provides also a page where the developer can download an SDK. Fusio can automatically generate this based on the provided schema information. In case the developer is authenticated, he can see his personal account, where it is possible to manage all API-related tasks, for example, creating an app or access token. An exciting feature of Fusio is the automatic SDK generation. To give you a first insight, I will download the generated TypeScript SDK and open it in VS Code. Now I use the SDK client to simply get some data from the API, which we have just created. Through the schema, everything is type hinted and can be easily used. This makes Fusio also great as an backend for a single-page application. At last, I like to show you the MCP integration, which we have added in the latest 6.0 version. Through this integration, it is possible to use, for example, Copilot to interact with Fusio. To use this, you need to add Fusio as MCP server. Also make sure that the right tools are configured. Currently, there is a limitation of 128 tools, but this might change in the future. Now we can start and talk to our LLM, and it can use all available tools. In this demo, I try to get some information and also create a new modified action. It provides a new way to interact with Fusio, which is really exciting. We have now successfully created a new action through the LLM. Let's take a look at the backend to see whether the action works. In this case, the LLM has done a good job and successfully created a new working version. This concludes the first introduction to Fusio. I hope I could give you a first impression how Fusio works. There are many more features, which we have not yet covered. In case you are interested, feel free to check out our website or GitHub repository.